Okay, thanks for joining us here today to learn a little bit more about catalytic converter thefts. We are here to kind of talk a little bit more about what's going on in the department that we're seeing around us with reports of catalytic converter thefts. So my name is Katie Zerl and I'm the Crime Prevention Coordinator with Bloomington Police.
My name is Bill King. I'm a detective with the Bloomington Police as well.
So we are going to partner here together today to share some information and help you be better informed and hopefully become less chance of being a victim of this crime. So Bill, tell us a little bit about what is a catalytic converter and why is this a target for thieves?
So a catalytic converter is actually part of the emissions and exhaust system on a vehicle. It was mandated by the federal government in the early to mid 70s to combat pollution. And it's standard on all vehicles. They're required to have it by law. The reason that they're a target for thieves is because part of the process with catalytic converters is it contains precious metals. Most of them are from a certain family of precious metals, mainly platinum and some other ones. But depending on the type of vehicle and the size of the catalytic converter, it contain quite a few precious metals, and the scrap value of the precious metals are the reason that they're stolen.
And how much typically do people get for these materials if they do scrap them?
Well, it all depends on the size and the type of catalytic converter. And it also depends on the market rate of precious metals. Typically, an inexpensive one would be $50 to $100, and some of them can be up to 500 or 600. The more expensive ones are typically on foreign cars, and if you can imagine the kind of car that is used in pollution-ridden company or countries like China or some of those places that have huge pollution problems, the kind of cars that are produced there and sold there that are also sold in the United States are typically the ones with the highest amount of precious metals. So your Priuses, Hondas, Toyotas, those kind of vehicles are the ones that typically have the most precious metal in them.
Okay, great. And so where would this part be found on a vehicle?
They're all typically just underneath. Where exactly underneath the vehicle depends on the make and the model. Some are closer to the engine, some are between the engine and the back, but typically the exhaust coming out of the engine, the first emissions device it passes through is the catalytic converter, and then goes on to the rest of the exhaust system to include the tailpipes and mufflers.
Okay, so we have a photo here on the screen that kind of shows you a better idea. The image here on the left shows the catalytic converter in place on a vehicle, and then the image on the right is a vehicle that has had the catalytic converter removed. So you can see where that void in that space now resides. So hopefully this kind of gives a bit better information on that as well. So how would one know if your catalytic converter has been stolen?
Typically, what ends up happening is that someone won't even know it was stolen. They'll come out to their car, they'll start it, and it'll be extremely loud, like it has no exhaust. Like I mentioned before, right after the engine is where the catalytic converter is typically at. So basically, you're getting the full noise of the engine exhaust right underneath the vehicle, and it's going to echo and resonate under the vehicle, and it's going to be extremely loud. A lot of people will confuse it with some kind of a mechanical problem, but typically, if your exhaust sound is louder than it normally is, it's almost a guarantee your catalytic converter has been cut off. The main problem when these get stolen is it's not simply just the catalytic converter. If it was simple as like a tire getting stolen, you can just go buy a new tire and replace it. But what they end up doing is the criminals who are doing this, they cut the exhaust system on both sides of the catalytic converter to remove it. And typically that also involves cutting out the wiring harness for an oxygen sensor, which is installed typically before or after the catalytic converter, depending on the car. So essentially, they're stealing a $500 to $1,000 catalytic converter, but doing $2,000 of damage to the rest of the exhaust system under the vehicle. So.
Very disappointing then for people to find out that not only have they this new problem on their hand, but a pretty hefty expense to fix it as well.
Yeah, and it typically, I mean, insurance does cover it. I mean, because it's considered a theft from the vehicle. However, that depends if you have full coverage insurance or not, and what your deductible is as well. So.
So probably a good reminder for people to check with their insurance companies to see what kind of coverage they have, because we are seeing an increase in this regard with catalytics being stolen, not only here in Bloomington, but it's a metro-wide issue that's become more of a crime of opportunity because we have vehicles parked they're readily available and people have a easy access to try to acquire funds and scrap it and get that immediate cash value. So it is something that we're seeing here, but also across the metro. So it's something good to maybe check with insurance to see if this would happen to you, what kind of situation you would be in. A question I have for you, I guess, too, is if I came out to my car and I noticed that this happened, is it safe to drive a vehicle with this, or what would you recommend for somebody who finds themselves in this situation?
It's not going to affect the vehicle at all. You'll probably end up getting a check engine light tripped on your dashboard because the oxygen sensor, the wiring harness is almost always cut. It's extremely loud and unpleasant to be in the vehicle like this, so I wouldn't make a point of doing a road trip in it or anything like that. But if you needed to immediately get to work or get to a repair shop right away, you could drive it to that. You don't need to have it towed. But the other problem is, depending on how the exhaust systems are cut, they they could actually be dangling from underneath the vehicle. So if you're driving around and some of those dangling pieces get hit by anything on the roadway or just going over a bump or anything like that, it could actually do more damage. So it's best to, not drive a ton if it happens, and make sure you're not dragging any parts underneath if you need to. But like I said, I wouldn't recommend any long-term use driving it like that.
Great, thanks for the good advice there. We kind of chat a little bit about this, but can you explain, are we seeing any certain type of vehicles that are more susceptible to having their catalytics stolen?
Yeah, I did kind of jump into that a little earlier. Like I said before, any vehicle that's sold in more pollution-ridden areas of the world, that's also sold in the United States, typically have more precious metals in the catalytic converters. The other ones are anything that's high off the ground. So a lot of minivans, SUVs of the Toyota, Honda variety get stolen a lot, mainly because they don't need to jack it up to get underneath it. They can just crawl right underneath it and cut them off without using a jack, and it's quick and easy that way. A lot of large trucks, for some reason, heavy duty Fords, they get theirs taken a lot just because of the sheer size of the catalytic converter on those. And then a lot of like dock trucks will get taken too, just because those typically get left in, warehouse parking lots and whatnot overnight. And even though they're not the most expensive as far as the precious metals go, quantity is there too. You get, 5, 10 of them at $100 a piece. It's still a lot of money.
Yeah, I have seen that in some of our crime reports too, that some nonprofits or businesses will have are sometimes prime targets as well because they'll have two, three, four vehicles sitting there and they can make it quick, in and out and they'll attack all the vehicles that are parked. So it can be quite a big detriment then to those nonprofits or small businesses that now have not just one but multiple catalytics on their vehicles that they're having to replace and deal with that damages. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what are some of the prevention tips that somebody could do to lessen the chances of being a victim.
So we see a lot of spikes in catalytic converter thefts in the middle of summer and the middle of winter, and mainly because a lot of people have their windows shut then. It's cold out. I mean, we're, below zero right now, and then in the middle of summer when it's 90 to 100 degrees, people have their air conditioning on. So it gives people almost like a security blanket when they go outside, because the act of actually cutting catalytic converter off a vehicle is extremely loud. You think about it, you're using a cordless saw and cutting through metal, and the noise it's making is extremely loud, and then everything echoes and resonates under the vehicle. You're shaking the rest of the exhaust. So we see a spike in those times of years. So obviously these times of years is when you would want to be cautious of where you park. Make sure you park in a well lit area. um, that's the best thing you can do. The other thing too is that if you have any kind of a security system that has any shock sensor on it, anything like that, that would prevent it, because obviously the act of cutting the catalytic converter off and or jacking the car up will trip those. Any kind of video surveillance that you have is obviously great if we can get suspect images. Unfortunately, most video surveillance, especially at hotels and apartment buildings and things like that, they're more liability driven for hotels than to catch criminals. So we get great pictures of people committing the crimes, but not necessarily enough to identify them. Um, Simple Google searches on your make and model of vehicle too. I know the Priuses have a bunch out there, and I know the heavy duty Fords. There are a lot of prevention devices that you can install at a cost to yourself to prevent this from happening in the future. If you think about it, it's like a lot of these prevention devices, whether it's shields or cables or anything like that. you install them on your vehicle for $200-300, and if someone really wants to get your catalytic converter off and has all the time in the world, these devices will not stop them. However, it's going to stop the people that do the quick and easy just underneath. I mean, if someone had 2 hours to be able to do it, they could get through these devices as well. But these are the ones that are going to prevent the people that are going vehicle to vehicle quickly cutting these off. It's cheaper than your insurance deductible. $200-300 for one of these security devices. Most people carry a $500 insurance deductible in their vehicle. It's cheaper than that, and a lot of people will put them on after they've been hit once. I know a lot of other cities will spray paint the catalytic converters with bright heat sensitive paint, so obviously it's marked somehow. Southern states and out west, they'll actually engrave the VIN or the license plate number on the catalytic converter for later identification. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, with the corrosion and everything else we have on the streets with rusting cars and everything else, that doesn't hold up quite as well, but it's definitely an idea.
That's great, great suggestion there as well, for sure. Because I know oftentimes when we look at the investigative side, we may stop a suspect and they'll have catalytics in the car, but now we're becoming a situation where it's hard to pinpoint them to where that exactly came from. So if there's some way to engrave it, that can be helpful for the prosecution side as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We've gotten lucky sometimes where we've managed to pull over vehicles and um, you know, um, observant neighbors have called in suspicious activity, and we've managed to make traffic stops on vehicles, and then we'll pull over a carload of people with a trunk full of catalytic converters, and myself and other detectives have gone victim to victim and matched up cut marks on catalytic converters to make sure that we get them into the right vehicles and everything like that. It can be done, but unfortunately there's actually a legitimate side of catalytic converter recycling. You think about any repair shop that replaces an exhaust on a vehicle, dealerships, legitimate scrap yards that recycle vehicles. That's part of their business, is getting the money for precious metals out of those. So it's one of those things where if we can't immediately prove something, a lot of times things like that will go unchecked.
Yeah, definitely. Good information as well. So what else can the community do to help in this process?
Obviously, the best thing to do is report any kind of suspicious activity. That's how we've gotten lucky every time we've managed to catch big groups of these people doing this sort of thing. Is suspicious vehicles that are lurking around, making multiple loops through apartment buildings, any kind of weird noises that you hear in the middle of the night, anything at all. It may seem like you're bothering us or anything like that, but it's not. That's how we get lucky and catch these people in the act. We'll have someone call and be like, I heard this weird metal on metal noise in my parking lot, and there's this vehicle out there, people walking around. If they wouldn't have had the decision to call us, we would never have caught these people, and that's how we catch most of them. Obviously, we don't encourage people to confront people that are actively committing crimes and whatnot, but a 911 call with descriptions, vehicle descriptions, license plates, things like that, are super helpful. And I'm currently working a couple cases now where I'm having the same vehicle at a couple different scenes now, with distinctive marks on it. So obviously, I'm going to be able to tie that. If that vehicle's ever located, I'm going to be able to tie all those crimes together, which is great. So super observant neighbors, and make sure and call anytime there's some suspicious activity.
For sure, we can't underestimate the value of what the community does to help us in the work that we do in law enforcement. It's the messaging I say time and again, that we're only effective if we have a lot of the work with the community helping us. So as Detective King said, call those suspicious things in if you have that weird hunch, and just call it in and we'll check it out. So that's how we really value and appreciate the work that's being done by the community, as well as we try to limit these things from happening and have less people in the community being victims.
Absolutely.
So that's the information we have today on catalytic converter thefts. Our information is here on the screen. Should you have follow-up questions or comments or things to follow up with us after this, feel free to reach out to myself or Detective King. I know we'd be more than happy to answer those questions for you. Thanks so much, Detective King, for joining me today to talk about this topic, and hopefully we'll have people be more educated and well-informed from this point forward. So we'll have less victims here in Bloomington. Thanks so
Yep.
much.
Sounds good. Thanks, Katie.